Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Thrive in China Roundtable. We are going to be talking about designing your China roadmap for 2023. Before we start today's session, I always want to understand the background of the people that have subscribed to our roundtable. If you would be so kind as to interact with us, let us know. Are you a newbie to China? Are you a startup in China? Are you an experienced China hand? This always gives us a little bit of insight as to who is attending so that we can tailor make our presentations accordingly. So please do interact with us and let us know who you are. For those of you that are new to our roundtable, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. We are a leading expert in inbound investment to China and Hong Kong. I specifically have 18 years of experience in corporate services and compliance in China, where my brother, who is our group managing director and is based in Hong Kong, has over 25 years of corporate services and compliance experience in Hong Kong. We have helped over 600 international companies across industries and sectors with their market entry strategy into Asia, specifically into Hong Kong and China, as well as with their implementation and growth. I am personally a creator of a series of administrative processes, one of them being designing your China roadmap, where we help companies remove the complexities around the administrative processes in China so that they have full transparency and clarity over building a foundation within China. If you're interested in learning more about what we do and what I do, you can head on over to our website, which is www.woodburnglobal.com. And for those that have registered for our Thrive in China Roundtable, we are offering all registrants a free copy of our ebook, The 10 Biggest Mistakes Companies Make in China. If you are interested in receiving a free copy, just email me directly at christina@woodburnglobal.com. So we are starting roundtable number 8 for 2023, and the topic for today is designing your China roadmap for 2023. Now, what is the China roadmap? The China roadmap is a system process that I have created to help companies and entrepreneurs understand the roadmap that they have to go through in order to be successful in the Chinese market. These are a lot of administrative processes. These are a lot of things that have to happen, not just once, but consistently throughout your China journey. And I hope you will be able to create a checklist for yourself at the end of today's roundtable so that you understand what you still have to do in terms of creating your China strategy, implementing that strategy, and then focusing on the growth of that China strategy. The China roadmap has 3 milestones. One is evaluating the opportunity in China. The second is implementing your strategy. And the third is focusing on growth and scaling up in the market. The 3, steps, I call them superpowers that you need to achieve in order to succeed and go past each milestone. There are 9 superpowers in total. And these should be habits that you develop throughout your China journey to make sure that you are really, really creating a solid foundation so that you have the ability to grow in China. So let's get cracking. What are the problems that I see if companies or entrepreneurs don't follow the China roadmap? The first is research is creating new knowledge. If you don't, in your first milestone, evaluate the opportunity in China by actually researching the market, you are going to get stuck. I met with a candy company out of Austria. This was back in 2008, 2009. They came to meet with me because they were interested in the Chinese market and they wanted to move along. And when I asked them for the agenda of the meeting, we were getting into the nitty-gritty details of what they'd already accomplished and what they wanted to accomplish. In short, they had done no research as to what it means as a food and beverage company to import food and beverage items into the Chinese market. They didn't understand the labeling requirements. They didn't understand the licensing requirements. They didn't understand that you had to have a specific importer of record who had these licenses to be able to import. They didn't even have a customer database. But in the meeting, it was discovered that they were joining the Cial trade show, which is the food trade show in Shanghai. And they already had a 20-foot container on the water coming out to China because they made assumption that not even with a booth at the trade show, but just with a trolley of samples, they would garner clients, which obviously didn't happen. And the outcome was that that shipment was returned because they didn't have an appropriate importer of record. And you can imagine that for perishable items, that was a container that was put to waste. The second most important aspect is implementation, right? But also understanding what you can and cannot do. And I completely get it. In China, you know, knowledge is limited and you only know what you know, right? But this is the whole point of joining these roundtables, is that so you can obtain a knowledge level that will help you make decisions, good decisions, not just for the short-term strategy of your company, but for the long-term strategy of your company. In this example, I want to highlight a German lock company that was producing in China. And they decided at some point that they didn't just want to produce in China, they also wanted to sell in China. But back in the day, 20 years prior, they had actually given exclusive rights to one of their production facilities to register their trademark in China. And this supplier owned their trademark. And obviously, when they wanted to sell into the Chinese market and do this independently, they realized they didn't even own the license to be able to sell their brand. And naturally, like any supplier, they took leverage and they said, well, if you want it back, we're going to sell it to you for a certain amount. And they did an evaluation on the brand image and the valuation on that brand in China. Something that they didn't have to spend money on if they had just realized that 20 years ago, they could have registered their own trademark by themselves without having to do it with their supplier. The next one follows on from the trademark story. A lot of people don't realize that although you are only producing in China, you still have to register your trademark. People make the assumption that trademark registrations only need to occur when you are actually selling into the Chinese market. Now, preemption by action is the best form of protection. What I want people to realize is that when they do their trademark registration in China, it is also for export. In this case, this was a company who had about 80 to 100 different suppliers. They had a falling out with one of their suppliers, and as an act of bad faith, this supplier registered their trademark in China, also registered it with the Customs Bureau, and as a consequence, they could not export their goods outside of China. By registering with the Customs Bureau, all of the goods were halted at customs. Everything that had that trademark on it was halted at customs. And the consequence was that for a period of 3 to 4 months, which was the court case that was actually brought upon the supplier, they couldn't do anything. All they could do was on certain products that had no brand name on it, they could export it as long as the cartons and the packaging had nothing on it, which is why I provided this picture with blank cartons. So it's really important to follow through with your actions. If you are registering your brand with your trademark, also realize you need to register it with the with the Customs Bureau. And also realize that registering your trademark has nothing to do with just doing sales. If you're doing any form of business in China, you should be registering your trademark. And last but not least, pay attention to everything and the truth will reveal itself. And this is particularly in the stage where you are looking at milestone number 3, where you want to grow and you want to scale. And this is the story of an Australian company producing leather in China, formulated a joint venture with a partner in Tianjin, who after 2 to 3 years of having this joint venture came to us and said, we would like an internal health check audit done because we don't understand why we're not yet profitable, particularly when we created the budget and all of that. Profitability was going to happen within the first 18 months. We went in and discovered a lot of things. We discovered that the joint venture partner was paying his brother a fixed sum every single month. Looked like an employee transaction, but actually it was not an employee, it was the brother, and they were bringing money out without even the Australian partner realizing it. In addition, they had registered the trademark without any action being that they were going to register the trademark. The list goes on about what they had done in bad faith behind the scenes. But if only the Australian partner would have been able to read their financial management reports in English versus only receiving them in Chinese and never giving feedback, they would have found this all out a lot sooner, particularly if they would have been able to read it, raise questions, and have discussions. They left a lot of holes open to allow for the Chinese joint venture partner to take advantage of the situation. When you grow and scale, you've got to pay attention to your business, not just make the assumption, I know my partner for the last 20, 15, 20, 25 years, I trust him with my life. If you're going to leave holes open, it leaves room for anybody to take advantage. Might not have been the joint venture partner, could have also been an employee that could have just taken advantage of the situation. So make sure you place focus on the business and don't sit back and relax from this. So with all these problems that I have highlighted, what is the solution? And ultimately, this is why I created the China Roadmap, to give people a checklist of what they need to go through with their Chinese company, and to realize that this checklist is not just something you do once and tick off. It is something you have to do consistently. You have to consistently evaluate the opportunity in China. You consistently have to update yourself on the implementation process and make sure you're constantly doing things right. And in order to do all of those, it's because we want to hit milestone number 3, which is the growth, and focusing on the business, focusing on where we have to pivot, being able to pivot immediately when roadblocks or crises occur, so that we take advantage of the market versus being delayed and moving back in the market. What I want people to take away from today's checklist or this China roadmap is that everybody's roadmap looks a little bit different based on their business model, based on what their goals and objectives are in the market. So you do have to tailor make this China roadmap to your design, and to your own strategy and to your own capabilities. Understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. And alternatively, if you do have weaknesses, then outsource those to providers where those are their strengths. But ultimately, what I want you to take away of this is to understand what have you already done and what still needs to be done in order to protect your business to be able to grow and scale. Okay, so we're going to go through these 9 superpowers, these 3 milestones now, so that you can create this checklist for yourself. Milestone number 1 is opportunity. It's evaluating the Chinese market. Is there an opportunity for my goods, for my services, and what is that return on investment should I be investing? Okay. Now, superpower number 1 for me is education. The second one is research, and the third one is strategy and budget. When we are looking at superpower number 1, education, you need to be able to build a knowledge base that continues to grow. I have been now almost 19 years in the Chinese market, and I continuously read legal updates on a daily basis so that I continuously have a solid knowledge base where I can make decisions around my own company or aid my clients in making decisions as well. In China, knowledge is power. It is what is going to help you to leverage, negotiate against third-party providers, customers, employees, whomever. Okay, the more you know, the better. And I completely understand that obviously in China, there is so much to learn. There's so much knowledge to gain. Just start somewhere and you will build off of it. Okay, and you can gain knowledge from a variety of different places. You can gain free knowledge from a variety of different places. So there are lawyers, there are corporate service providers, there are chambers of commerce, there are China country associations, and there's also the EU SME Center, which also provides free research reports and information and updates. Now, normally the webinars for most of these providers is free of charge. They may have master classes where you will pay, I don't know, between 3,000 and 10,000 renminbi. You don't have to attend those master classes, but obviously if it pertains to you at that specific moment, I encourage you to invest in that knowledge level so that you have the ability to protect your business. Or allocate that budget to a staff member to obtain that knowledge and to debrief you, right, on what you are learning. It is really, really important to subscribe to as many newsletters as possible. A lot of the time, the information might be in duplicate, but find, I don't know, 2 lawyers, 2 corporate service providers, 2 chambers of commerce, 1 country association, and the EU SME Center to obtain these updates so that you can better understand what's happening in the market. What I want you to understand for yourself is, how are you educating yourself on China business? How are you updating yourself on legislation, on tax situations, on employment termination, on all of these different things that could impact your business? Even if you don't have an entity on the ground, how are you updating yourself on transactional business with China, or cross-border e-commerce, or things that don't necessarily mean you have an entity on the ground? Legislation changes, regulations change daily. You need to be able to update yourself. So what I would like you to do is look at what you're subscribed to today. Does it help you? If it doesn't, unsubscribe yourself. You know, if you're not reading anything, get out of it. And evaluate, again, 2 lawyers, 2 corporate service providers, 2 chambers of commerce. You can even subscribe to more. The subscriptions are free of charge, right? You don't have to pay to be a subscriber. So why not obtain these newsletters? And you don't have to read every single word that's going on in them, but you have an understanding and can update yourself on what is going on. And the beauty of it is, whenever there's new information that pops up, you can always take that to your team and say, look, I think we need to ask more questions now because this topic pertains to us. So the action plan based on superpower number 1 is, how are you educating yourself? What newsletters are you subscribed to? Who is giving you regulation updates? How often are you receiving them? And do you feel like you know what is going on in the Chinese market? Superpower number 2 is research. I actually don't talk to companies that haven't done research in China. And because for me, it means they haven't evaluated the market yet, and they don't know to what extent their return on investment is going to be in the Chinese market. Research is invaluable. It is vital for you to understand and evaluate the opportunity in China, but it is also vital for you to be able to make decisions as you are implementing your business and as you are growing and scaling your business. There are a variety of different research methodologies that you can look at. You don't have to do all of them. You need to do the ones that are going to give you concrete information and data that are going to help you to make decisions now. To give you an example, I do a competitor benchmarking and a pricing research every 2 years on my competitors to evaluate what service categories are they offering, how do they differ from me, how are they delivering those services, and I look at pricing. And how comparable is it to me? This is something that's invaluable for me because I need to know where I position myself in the market. Am I still a premium provider? Am I a mid-market provider? Am I a cheap provider? This helps me in order to also then understand how I'm going to do my marketing and how I'm going to tweak my marketing. You have to look at your own business plan, your own strategy, or look at the functions that you're actually performing in the Chinese market to evaluate what research is going to fit you now, and make sure you get that research done, whether you do it in-house or whether you outsource that to a specialist in that category. Now, there are several ways to categorize market research methodologies. There's no one fits all. Like I said, you're designing your China roadmap. You got to look at your budget and understand how much can you spend on this research and evaluate what is the most valuable information do you need right now to make a decision. But of course, you can look at secondary research. The EU SME Center has market research reports that are free of charge, or if they are chargeable, you're spending maybe 50 euros, 100 euros max for a detailed market research study. You also have associations like the China-Britain Business Council that provides detailed research. They can also do supplier searches, distributor searches, and vet those providers. If you are selling consumer products, you might want to have focus groups that evaluate your packaging, taste, whatever regarding these items, right? you need to be able to do this research. If you're in the food and beverage sector, you may want to have a research done in supermarkets with photos taken and pricing looked at, displays looked at, so you have a better understanding of what's happening in the market. If you're doing cross-border e-commerce, you may want to evaluate your competitors that are selling similar products and how are they doing? What do the reviews say? Can you feed off of those reviews so that you can improve the experience to the consumers that are coming to your site? So research, like I said, is invaluable. And sometimes I feel like companies don't place enough value in it and they don't place enough budget into it because they do it once off and they don't redo it. It is something that should be done consistently. When you're looking at research, you're going to have certain data points. And I want you as an action point from this to analyze what data points do you have now and what data points do you still need to make decisions and take action so that you can evaluate the opportunity that exists in the Chinese market, or evaluate whether it makes sense to implement a structure in China, or to evaluate how you're going to grow and scale up in China. Like I said, each of these superpowers is not something you do one-off. It's something that's consistent throughout the milestones. So I want you to analyze, what do you have in terms of data points now? Are they still reliable, or is it all pieces of data? What do you still need? So analyze that, right? And then contact specialists who can then provide you proposals so that you have the ability to budget and prioritize what should you do next. Superpower number 3 is building up a China strategy, a business plan, a budget, right, for the Chinese market. This is critical whether you are simply transacting with China or whether you're actually implementing a structure in China. You've got to create a game plan. You got to create a phased business plan that's going to help you from the short term to the long term. And obviously, you then have to create a matching financial plan and budget in order to be able to hit the next milestone and actually implement. Okay. This is something that bigger companies will have, it's part of their internal processes. Small entrepreneur type businesses or small, medium-sized businesses might not go into the nitty-gritty details of this. It is really important to go into the nitty-gritty details. One of the biggest dilemmas I see with companies in China is the lack of financial resources available to actually implement, running out of cash sooner than expected, and realizing they don't have further cash to invest, and having to either freeze the business, halt the business, or ultimately move the business out of China because they're not ready yet, and having wasted all of that initial funding. So when you are creating your strategy, your business plan, your budget, don't rush, don't build it up haphazardly, right? You've got to do it right. The biggest tip I can offer you is get these business plans and budgets validated by experts, potentially in your sector or industry. This can be from lawyers or consultants or service providers, corporate service providers that can help you to evaluate them, tell you what you're missing, so that you're creating a solid strategy. A downside for many China leaders is that when they take these budgets and business plans to the board of directors or the managing director to make a decision as to whether to implement in China, or basically hit that green light, they run into a lot of roadblocks because they can't answer questions, and it just doesn't look good in that first meeting. So it helps to get it validated. Be conservative. You might be thinking, oh my God, the Chinese market is huge for us. Enthusiasm is fantastic. I love it. But unless you've got the data from your research saying that you can be as enthusiastic as you want because the data is showing that, that's fine. If you don't have data and you're enthusiastic and you're totally making your numbers and your business plan wrong, that's not going to look good with the board of directors. So be conservative with your business plan. Make sure that when you are creating it, you're basing it on the education and the research that you've already developed. and start early. Throwing together a China strategy or a business plan is difficult, especially if you then want to get it validated. And don't forget that creating a strategy and business plan is not that you just do it once prior to your investment into China. It is that you continue to create these business plans and budgets, that you tweak them, pivot them in the directions based on the crises that occur in the Chinese market. I can tell you right now, when everyone was preparing their budgets for 2023 for China, what was a budget in October has probably pivoted and changed considerably come January and February since the borders have opened. So you've got to be prepared to be able to pivot and change straight away. And remember, monitor, evaluate, and reforecast. Now, for larger organizations, this is something that's going to happen anyway. It's intrinsic and part of their processing system. But for entrepreneurs and for small, medium-sized companies, this might not be something that you do. And when it comes to China, it's something that is a habit that you have to instill. This is also why with some companies that we work with, we organize monthly phone calls that we help and encourage our clients to monitor, to evaluate, and reforecast based on what's coming up, because things can change month to month. Now, like with every other superpower so far, this is the action that I want people to take, is when you're looking at your China strategy and business plan, what chapters have you completed? What still needs to be done? When you're looking at your financial budget plan, what items have you budgeted for and what still needs to be budgeted for? Where do you still need help? And who can you collaborate in order to make sure that that China strategy, you know, the business plan and the budget are really, really, really solid, that you can then just take it, get it approved, and implement. So do analyze this, put pen to paper. This always helps. I'm a visual person, so I know it always helps me, but I hope this will also help you. So at the end of milestone 1, the question is, have you been able to evaluate the opportunity for China? Have you been able to present this to the decision makers, whether it's the board of directors or whether it's the managing director, and they've got no further questions, they think this is an amazing opportunity, and they are ready to hit the green light? I hope that after these 3 milestones, you are in that category and you have the ability now to go ahead and implement in China. Milestone number 2 is looking now at implementation, okay? And we're looking at 3 superpowers. One is ecosystem, one is protection, and one is developing system processes. So let's take a look. Ecosystem. I would not be where I am today, 19 years after I arrived in China, without the ecosystem of people, my network that has helped me, supported me to be able to create a foundation for my business and grow my business in China. Everybody going into China should be building their own ecosystem of individuals, of companies that are going to help to support their growth in China. This can be from friends, can be suppliers, can be lawyers, corporate service providers, marketing agencies, PR agencies, headhunters, logistics providers, distributors, could be any banks, could be anybody, okay? But you need to build this ecosystem, this network of people that are going to help you. Networking is fundamental when you're going in the Chinese market, okay? You need to be aware that by connecting with one person, you might get introduced to another person who might introduce you to another person. There are several ways to meet or connect with people. One is trade shows. Borders are open, trade shows are on. The Canton Fair is coming live in April. There are other trade shows that are going on in 2023. This is the year to come into China to be meeting with people. Make sure you've downloaded WeChat. I have heard from a number of people that either their WeChat accounts have been blocked or canceled. Make sure you have WeChat. Try and download it somehow, some shape or form. Make sure you have business cards, although that's less and less. WeChat is really, 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 really the key. LinkedIn, don't forget to connect with as many China-related people as you can on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is still working in China. There's no firewall with it, so you still have the ability to network with people through that avenue. When you've downloaded WeChat, download certain mini programs from the Chambers of Commerce. There are a lot of group sites. We, for example, have our own Thrive in China WeChat group. We've got over 200 people on there, and the whole point is that it's business people to business people, helping and aiding should there be any questions. And most importantly, also hurrahing their successes should they have any. And obviously go to chamber networking events, whether that is in your home jurisdiction, China-related events, Hong Kong-related events, or going into Hong Kong and China for networking events as well. Meet and connect. Now, when you are evaluating your ecosystem for China, you need to know, who do you know? Now, I have over 500 people in my WeChat account. And once or twice a year, I do an exercise to understand who is who. Do they still work in the same companies that they work with today? I kind of update my contact list, if you will. And I reevaluate who could be a potential referral partner, client, somebody I would just like to be friends with and discuss who can bring value to me for this year and help me grow in my business. Okay, so find out who's in your list today and understand, who do you still need? You know, I have companies who approach me because they say, Christina, we really need to have 2 to 3 contacts to logistics companies. Who do your clients work with? And I give them the names of 2 or 3 companies that they can then evaluate, or marketing agencies, or whatever the case might be. Evaluate, who do you still need to reach out to? If you're not happy with somebody today, do you want to have the contact to somebody new? And use these methodologies of the directories of the Chambers of Commerce. Look at the newsletters, who is speaking, so you can get updates on who's in the forefront of people's minds in the market. And also then reach out on WeChat and ask people, who do you know that could help me, etc. There's always ways of finding new contacts. Superpower number 5 is protection. As we all know, fraud exists globally. It also exists in China. And whenever you are implementing your business or growing your business, when fraud occurs, it always comes as a shock, because you think, wow, it's never going to happen to me. And then it happens. You know, there are always situations in China where you might have very high expectations regarding the market. You trust everybody, and then suddenly it pops up. Fraud can happen from anybody, from employees, from suppliers, from customers. It can happen from anyone, okay? What I want you all to be aware of, though, is that it can, and it probably will happen to you at some point in your China journey. So instead of behaving like you're in shock when it happens, realize, all right, it's my turn, it's happened, how am I going to solve it? Instead of sitting back and blaming, what could we have done, what should we have done? My philosophy is, don't look back at the past, what's done is done, how do we solve it? And in a market that is as swift as China, you need to be able to react very, very quickly, okay? But if you are in the stage of implementation, and even if you're not in the stage of implementation, I want you guys to make your checklist. What have you done to protect your investment? What still needs to be done to protect your investment? All right. Have you looked at intellectual property? Are your trademarks registered? Are your patents registered? Look at corporate governance. Have you implemented system processes to protect your licenses? Oops, sorry, 1 second. To protect your licenses, to protect your company chops. Do you have a system process in place to do due diligence and vet third-party providers, suppliers, logistics providers, corporate service providers, lawyers? Do you have these procedures in place? How are you using your company chops? Do you keep a logbook? When you have trade transactions, do you have a sales guideline on how to give discounts? Actually, I just spoke with a client today who was so upset with the sales, or one of their regional sales managers, because They're trying to garner new clients and he's just giving discounts where on the first transaction, they're going to make no profitability. But they also don't have a system process in place to guide the guy. They just get angry at him when he does it, but there's no process to guide him. If you're a service company, do you have system processes also to guide your BD managers or sales managers when they're finding new clients? Do you have inventory and warehousing systems? Now, this is everything you have to think about. And I just want to highlight, whether you have an entity in China or not, these are things, these are parts of your checklist that you have to evaluate. Are we protected in these areas? Okay, because a lot of these things are not done even when you're simply doing cross-border transactions, right? You've got to evaluate all of this and make sure you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Leading off from superpower number 5, which is protection, right? Evaluating what assets do you need to protect in China. You then have to implement those system processes. Now, you might make the assumption, well, if we evaluate, we're going to implement. No. This is an administrative process that nobody likes to do. Everybody hates administrative processes. But you've got to look at this checklist now. Evaluate what you need to protect and think about establishing internal operational guidelines, management directives. If you've got an entity in China, you may want to do health checks and internal audits, but I also want to highlight, if you are doing procurement in China, you may want to do health checks on your suppliers to make sure, are they still there? Are they still real, especially after these 3 years of COVID? If you've got customers in China, how healthy are they? You know, evaluate them. Because you don't want to get into a situation where suddenly your customers can't pay you because nobody's been updating and meeting with them and getting information from them. So health checks and internal audits are not just for your own entity in China. It's also looking at your third-party providers and doing those checks as well. It's looking at the appointment of directors and senior management personnel that are responsible for the China business. Do you have high turnover of these staff? Because if you do, that's probably also halting you in terms of being able to pivot the business or make decisions. You've got to obtain advice and build your ecosystem of China experts, because for all the 3 steps prior, you may not be physically on the ground to perform certain actions, and you might not have the headcount or the resources to be able to implement all of that. So again, looking at superpower number 4, which is having your own ecosystem of China experts, people that are going to help you to grow in China, maybe they can help you with this stuff that you don't actually like to do. And then last but not least, it's not just a matter of creating a beautiful guideline, whether it's in PowerPoint or in PDF, it's actually then giving it to your staff or giving it to the senior management personnel and having them read it, sign off on it, or having internal meetings saying, do you understand it? Do you agree with it? Insight is invaluable, right? I have been in China for 19 years. I still don't consider myself within my team the expert. My Chinese staff are the expert, right? They've got the education, they are Chinese, they've got the network with all their tax officers and what government officers and whatnot. I don't, they do. I want their feedback. I want them to be able to give me feedback on the system processes that we can amend, that we can pivot, so that we can consistently become more efficient. There is a Japanese saying called Kaizen, which is continued improvement. And I always believe that when you are a startup in China, your philosophy should be on continuous improvement. How can I improve by 1% day on day? And to do that, you need the feedback from your audience, from your ecosystem as well, to give you that feedback, your employees, your customers, your suppliers, everybody. So please don't forget, implementation is critical. Don't pay for somebody to create a beautiful operational guideline, but not actually implement it and discuss it with the team. And last but not least on this point, preemption by action is your best and least expensive form of protection. I want to highlight here that people do not place emphasis and priority on protecting their business and implementing system processes because they are 2 administrative functions. And it's not part of your core function, which is either sales or procurement or supply chain. So it's always put on everybody's bottom to-do list. But I can tell you, if you don't protect your business, you are going to be spending a hell of a lot of money when you hit these and I tell you, you're going to hit them, hit these roadblocks, hit these obstacles in the Chinese market. So take action by what I'm saying in terms of designing your China roadmap, getting an ecosystem of people, evaluating what you want to protect, and actually implementing processes to protect them. Here, I've listed a checklist. It's very top of my head checklist, guys. All right, because again, you're designing your China roadmap based on your business model. But just a couple of things to think about. On the left side, this is for everybody. Trademark search, registration, domain registration, website development, marketing material, product registrations, due diligence on partners, operational guidelines, management directives. On the right side, this is more in relation to companies that are looking to implement a structure in China. These are things that you have to think about in terms of business scope, capital investment, term of validity, shareholder, corporate management, bank, office address, financial guidelines, HR guidelines, etc. Very brief checklist. Okay, I could go into so much more detail, but it really, really does need to be tailor-made to each person's business model and what their goals and objectives are in China. But I hope this is a starting point for you, again, to have a starting point, a checklist, start with this, and then move on. And hopefully that checklist gets bigger and bigger in terms of your evaluation on what to protect and then developing that system process to protect it. So we've hit now milestone number 2. Have you been able to implement your China strategy successfully? Do you have an ecosystem of partners that are going to support you? Have you evaluated what needs to be protected? Have you actually developed system processes to protect those assets? The next stage is growth. Okay, milestone number 3 for me is growth. Milestone number 1, evaluating the opportunity in China. Milestone number 2, implementation. At this point, you should be having a solid foundation for your business, where in reality, if you hit a roadblock, you're going to find a solution based on this solid foundation versus having to go backwards and redo something or do something because you just never did it, because you were too lazy to do it and it wasn't a priority. Okay. At this point with milestone number 3, we want to be solid so that we have a focus, growth and scale. Okay. Now, for me, being an accounting provider, growth and scale can only really come from numbers. Can come from other areas too, but you got to look at your financial numbers. They are going to reveal so much to you in terms of how you should be pivoting your business, in what way you should be pivoting. The goal with the numbers, by producing these numbers, is that you have the ability to analyze your business. And then you want to focus. Okay? Without the numbers, you don't have the ability to analyze and you can't focus. You are constantly in this mind frame of backtracking and doing administrative matters that won't help you in terms of focusing on growth and scale. Okay? And I see this with a lot of companies. Okay? Focus, focus, focus is critical. When I started off in China in 2003, I think for the first 5 years of the business, 50% of my time was on HR issues because I didn't have a solid HR department. I didn't have a solid HR foundation. I was dealing with all of the HR issues that there was no way that I could develop and grow the business or even pivot the business. I had no time to analyze because really I was spending so much time on that aspect. Okay. HR is something that's also fundamental that should be part of your checklist, that you need to protect yourself against employees, employee labor issues, etc. So let's hit on the last 3 superpowers. So superpower number 7 is numbers. Whether you have an entity in China or not, you want to have a sound accounting system within your organization that is purely looking at China, meaning that China revenue is allocated China cost is allocated, China G&A expenses are allocated. Whether this is paid all from the HQ or whether you have an entity on the ground, you need to have China numbers. You need to be able to look at these numbers, read these numbers, understand these numbers, fine-tune these numbers so that we can move to the next superpower. Now, if you are simply transacting with China, do you have this China P&L that you are looking at? Is it broken down into nitty-gritty details? If you are responsible for China, but you're employed, let's say, by a UK company, are your labor costs still in the China P&L? They should be if your time is 100% spent on China. You've got to talk with your finance department to ask them to produce these. And hopefully, again, larger organizations, this is standard. Smaller organizations, it might not be. You might get numbers thrown at you, but it might not be a consolidated list of figures. So do check on that. Now, do you receive those monthly? I say, do you receive them in English? Because sometimes you might not, right? Do you proactively sit with your finance team to discuss them? Now, if you have an entity in China, these questions still pertain. Do you have financial management reports that are in English and yet you're receiving them on a monthly basis? The case study I provided earlier was of a joint venture where the Australian party was not receiving them in English. Mind you, they also never had the idea to just translate them themselves, which you could do. Okay. Do you proactively sit with the finance team in China to discuss them? Do you understand them? Because Chinese accounting is very different than Western accounting. We call it Fapiao accounting. It's not the typical Western known accrual accounting. So do you understand how things are booked in revenue, in cost, and G&A? This is your checklist. Do you have a solid, do you receive a solid package of financial management reports where you have the ability to read and understand them? This is vital because superpower number 8 is the ability to be able to analyze your business. Now, there's no point creating financial numbers if you cannot analyze them. Okay, you've got to be able to interpret them and understand what the numbers are telling you so that you can go to your different divisions or people within your organization and say, hey, you're slacking. The actuals that are occurring are not matching the budget. What is going on? If my revenue is not looking fantastic, I need to go to my sales team and BD team and say, hey, what's going on? Is it you or is it external circumstances? All right. You have to be as the leader, as the managing director, as the person responsible for China. You have to be the one to go to your different departments and have these tough conversations. But how can you do that if you don't have the numbers, you can't read them, you can't understand them? How can you have these proper conversations with your team and say, look, you're not achieving anything right now? And even more to that, because obviously analyzing means you have to go into the nitty-gritty of the details. If you've set KPIs for your sales team, is your finance team producing the KPI results so that you can go to your sales team and say, you're not hitting your targets? All of this foundation has to be created. And these conversations, you can't wait for them. You have to do them immediately. Okay? You've got to be able to analyze immediately. Now, the question is, based on your resources, do you want to analyze monthly or do you want to analyze weekly? When do you want to have these conversations with your internal team? Whether they're abroad or whether they're in China. All right? So it is important to create these habits where you are getting your management reports or getting whatever financial data that you want in the time that you want it in, that you then have the ability to make a decision, talk to your team, and actually implement again. This is going to lead you to superpower number 9, which gives you the ability to focus on your strategy, which is what we created in milestone number 1 when we were evaluating the opportunity in China. We want to be able to focus on that strategy, change it, pivot it. I don't know, get rid of people. The biggest mistake that I made in China when we had our own entity was that I was so scared to rock the boat with my employees, which is why 50% of my time was on HR issues, that I never fired the bad eggs. I should have done it, but I was so scared to have turnover. What would it look like? Even though everybody in China has high turnover, I just didn't want to do it. And it was a big, 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 big mistake, because it meant that 50% of my time was then spent on HR issues. So you've got to have, get rid of the fear, focus on what the numbers are telling you, use that as your leverage to be able to go to your employees and say, you're not performing, or go to your customers and say, you know, you've made an order, you haven't made another order in 6 months. Why? You got to be able to have these discussions and do them straight away. Okay. The key thing is making decisions, being able to tell your team what they're supposed to do, giving them those guidelines, and then telling them, well, you know, you're not hitting your targets. What's going on? You then have to hear the excuses and evaluate then if those excuses are true and valid and authentic, or whether they're making stuff up. But the key thing is that you need to have time in your day in terms of time management skills to be able to do that. And if you're focusing on protecting the business, on the foundation, on all of that aspects, you're not going to be able to have the time to actually focus. Now, for those of you that have already implemented their structure, so for those of you that are China experienced hands, or you're in your startup phase even, a question I want to give to all of you leaders is, do you have the ability to focus on your strategy and grow? And grow. I want to highlight that borders have been opened. It's a whole new market now in China. Everybody is saying that the first 6 months of this year, we're going to get back into the rhythm of it and see how everything is. People are traveling. Second half of the year, it's going to rise. And everybody is waiting for that 2024 boom. So now is the time where you need to place focus so you can hit that boom when it comes. And maybe that boom will come a lot sooner in your industry and in your sector. But do you currently have this ability to focus? I know that in January and February, I had no time to focus on anything because we had the rise of COVID. We had staff that were in and out. We had freelancers that were in and out. We had external providers that were in and out. It was chaos. It was hell. I was dealing with HR issues. I was dealing with people getting sick. I was dealing with people whose relatives had passed on. It was not fun. It was not funny. But I had 2 months already of 2023 where I was not able to focus. I am hoping that we don't run into those issues anymore, but we need to be able to focus on the business and pivot straight away. So are you able to do that? Again, just to recap the China roadmap and designing a roadmap for you for 2023, where things are really, really booming. It's looking at milestone 1, evaluating that opportunity, consistently evaluating that opportunity, implementing. Do we have an ecosystem? Do we need to update that ecosystem? Have we thought about crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's in terms of protecting our business and protecting our assets? Have we implemented system processes so that we can become an efficient machine in China? So that we have ultimately, in milestone number 3, the ability to grow and to scale and to focus. All right. I always revert back to the China roadmap. And when I get into situations like I did in January and February, where we had this COVID, really big COVID crisis, I was not able to focus on the numbers. I was not able to analyze and do any form of pivoting. We are finally doing that now in March. But it just means we have to backtrack a little bit. And this is why the China roadmap is not something you look at right away. It's something that you should always be looking at and using within your teams to evaluate your business. For those of you that are watching live and for those of you that are watching this on replay, I would love to hear what your biggest takeaway from today was. I hope that the China roadmap concept and process has alleviated or ultimately provided you with some transparency and clarity over what your next action plans should be. If you are looking for more advice on doing business in China or Hong Kong, if you have any pain points that you are struggling with, we can schedule a 15-minute discovery call to see if we can help you. The link is here. But if you're also just interested in emailing me, you can do so at Christina@woodburnglobal.com. And last but not least, please do encourage people to join our Thrive in China Roundtable. Our next session is next Wednesday, where we are going to be talking about how to legally hire and collaborate with employees in China without opening your own legal entity. We're going to be talking about the employer of record solution, also known as the professional employer organization, so that you have the ability to launch your business in China with people on the ground without going through the hassles and hooplas of setting up your own entity. So we're going to be talking about that next week. If you're interested, definitely join us next Wednesday, same time, 1 p.m. Central European time. I want to thank you all for joining. It's been a pleasure. And I hope for those of you that are watching this on replay, again, don't hesitate to reach out if you've got any questions. info@or Christina@woodburnglobal.com. Check out our website to see what we do. And if you want to join our Thrive in China Roundtable, Thrive in China WeChat group, my WeChat ID is KNCOLUCCIA. Just type in Thrive in China and I'll add you into the group. I want to wish everyone a fantastic day. Take care and goodbye.